can you just check my head is still in the shot?
Okay.
Your head, mashallah. Just move it slightly to
sorry,
your
you can see my
left.
cupboard in the background.
That way.
Yeah, that's it. You're in the
guys,
middle. You're in the middle
There's
now.
enough room above the head.
Yeah, mashallah, your top is fine.
We are
I'm talking
live.
about it.
Guys, we are live.
I can't see myself properly, so I just want to check it.
Are we
Mashallah,
live?
Yes, we are live.
Your head and
Assalamu
shoulders,
alaikum,
your
everyone.
head and shoulders above the rest.
Assalamu rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We are live. Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to the Imams Online conference today, or webinar. I'm so sorry for the delay. Huge apologies to everyone who's tuned in today. There's been technical problems from my end, so I'll take full the full blame for this, rightly so. Thank you all for joining us, and pray that you're all having a blessed Ramadan. Today's webinar is to discuss domestic violence in Muslim communities and how does our faith understand the complexities of domestic abuse. Now, statistically, we know that 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner in England and Wales alone. And we also know that according to the crime survey for England and Wales, the year ending March 2009, an estimated 5.7% of adults, that's 2.4 million people, experienced a form of domestic abuse in the last year. So we know this is prevalent, and we know that the crimes are constantly recorded, but where does this fit in line with our sense of British Islam or Islam as a whole? Now, today we're going to be covering domestic abuse from a UK context, but from an Islamic lens. Now, over the last couple of weeks with COVID-19, we're also very aware that domestic abuse and killings have more than doubled in the last 8 to 10 weeks in the period of COVID-19, and this is going to continue. And it's estimated that there is a fear that there could be almost over 4,000 deaths while this whole COVID-19 process continues. Domestic abuse, we know, is prevalent, and it also exists within Muslim communities, despite Muslim communities being no better or worse statistically than other communities in Britain. It's still embedded and is a deep issue, often swept under the carpet and considered a cultural taboo. The purpose of this session today is to encourage a serious examination of the issues and the problems of domestic abuse within Muslim communities. Now, we know domestic abuse is a broad issue, and the reality is we're unable today to unpack or solve all the sub-issues and sub-factors of the broader issue. However, we hope that today is the beginning of a series of conversations on domestic abuse, with many sessions to follow with other faith communities involved, inshallah. Our goal from this session today is to leave with those who are joining us and those who are involved in the arena to have a better idea or are better informed about what domestic abuse actually is, and its prevalence of what Islam says about it, and what are the nuances and contributing factors in undertaking behaviours of domestic abuse, and what mechanisms are required to deal with it head on effectively and hopefully to help stamp it out within our communities. Now, joining me today, or joining us, shall I say, to discuss this, we're joined by an illustrious panel of practitioners, religious leaders and legal advisors. So with us today, we have Shaheen Taj, OBE, who is the Executive Director of the Henna Foundation and has been on the front line of DV or domestic violence for the past 30 years, working on the national level within policy and within governance. Shireen Williams, MBE, is a Muslim chaplain and community activist who has been working with victims of domestic violence in the Muslim community for over 10 years. In her previous role within local government too, she was responsible for the coordination of domestic homicide reviews. We also have with us Qari Asim, MBE, who is a senior imam of Makkah Mosque in Leeds and is also a legal director of a global law firm. He is also the deputy chair of the government's anti-Muslim hatred Islamophobia working group, and he is chair of the Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board, and also a senior editor of Imams Online, who are hosting this for us today. We also have with us Imam Adam Kalwick, who is a Muslim chaplain from Liverpool. He's formerly served as a Muslim chaplain to the High Sheriff of Merseyside and Merseyside Police. And he's also been on the front line in dealing with domestic violence cases in a pastoral role. We also have with us Sheikha Khola Hassan, who comes from an illustrious theological family and background and has an academia background in Arabic law and international and comparative legal studies from SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies. She's also a regular broadcaster who provides expert advice on legal Islamic issues across mainstream media outlets, including the BBC. And she's also a consultant in Islamic issues, as well as a serving member, and it's fair to say one of the leading British women in serving on Europe's first Islamic Sharia Council. So this is our illustrious panel today. Welcome everybody. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for joining us today. How are you all?
Very well, thank you.
All good, alhamdulillah.
Brilliant. I think what we're going to do with everyone who's listening, just so you're aware, we're going to start the conversation with the panel speaking. So I'm going to hand it over to Shaheen. Shaheen, you've been in this arena for the best part of 30 years. Could you just give us an overview of what your experience has been in domestic violence and domestic abuse?
So if I try and set a backdrop, and it's a big ask in many ways, because if I always believe in coming from an honest position, and I have to look at myself and my family, and the family I sort of come from. I grew up in a home where, you know, my father and my mother valued each other. They understood each other. Of course, like any other couple, they had their challenges, but they absolutely loved and valued each other. You know, we lost our mum about 8 years ago, and our father still to this day, when we're not looking, he will actually ring her mobile number. That's how much he misses her. So that's how I was raised. So when the time came, and I was very young when I was married, and I very quickly started to see that this isn't right. It didn't feel right. And because we were raised to be never to talk about anything outside our family, it's whatever's going to be dealt with is going to be dealt within the family. You know, I just kept my mouth shut and got on with life. But I just didn't know how to deal with the issues that I was faced with. As life went on, I was working, I had my own business, and I was working, I had my own business. I came across women of Arab, Muslim background, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, you name it. I had a fabric business, and there would be thousands of women used to come and see me. Often they'd spend hours just talking about some of the things that they were faced with. And I thought to myself, okay, so what I'm going through isn't actually right. It isn't normal. But what am I going to do? And because of what other women were telling me as well, and that is, you can't do anything about it. You've just got to put up with it, and you just got to deal with it and ride it through. And so that's what myself and many others did. But I became quite seriously ill. And I'm not here to talk about my personal experience, but to cut a long story short, my marriage came to an end, and I made a pledge to myself and a promise to myself that I would do whatever I can to make sure what happened to me would never, ever happen to another woman. So when, for those women who have been through something like this, they all know that you start questioning yourself, who you are, why has this happened? And one of the things that kept coming to me was, is this because of my Islam? And I started to feel quite guilty. I started to question my sanity. I'm thinking, well, if it was to do with my Islam, then why is it that my parents didn't have any issues? Because they're practicing. anyway, I started going through a journey, and I remember traveling up and down the country. I recall meeting Humaira and Khalda Khan, and some women from Rotherham as well. And the issue in terms of domestic violence was pretty rife. But from the Muslim context, the only organization that I came across back then that was even talking about it was An-Nisa Society. And thankfully, I had the honor and privilege of listening and spending time with Humaira, and having read different things as well, listened to sheikhs like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. I knew that it wasn't Islam that was a problem. But for me, it was, okay, so I've visited all these organizations. What's my next steps? And the next steps were, I'm going to set up a one-stop shop, and I'm not going to define what we're going to do. So despite the challenges that I faced, along with the women that worked with me, people like Dara Azhar, Sayyidah Chowdhury in particular, Shireen came along as well, and there's many, many others that I could talk to you about. These women put their lives on the line. They came and worked with me, and we decided that let's see what comes through the door. That will be our evidence, because I came from a bit of an action research background, and also from an Islamic perspective as well. My father raised me with the importance of evidence. And I remember one of the most complex and serious cases that we dealt with involved a 14-year-old girl during Ramadan, had been taken from her home by an adult male. And he kept her in a place for about 3 or 4 days. And you can imagine what would have happened to that girl. I'm not going to go into explicits, but for me, it was a really surreal time, because people in our community knew this had happened. It was a very publicly discussed case. And when things were finally resolved and this young girl returned to her family, one of the imams asked to speak with me. And so, because I was so worried about what was going to be said, I didn't go on my own. I took people like Sayyidah with me and Thaira, and the imam said to me that he wanted to speak to me because he was very close to the grandfather of this young girl. And he said to me that he wanted to thank me for the work that I did, and to bring her back safely. And let's be clear, when this young girl went back to her family, there were conditions, by the local authority, but promises that, they weren't going to fly her off to Pakistan or anything like that.
Well, yeah, it's a child case, so obviously
Absolutely.
the conditions are going, and obviously,
Yeah.
we need to be very careful and sensitive,
Yeah.
because we are dealing with children here.
Absolutely.
And so there are different policies in place when
Yes.
you're dealing with
But
children and
this
domestic
is about
violence.
25 years ago. So this was a long time ago. But I remember the Imam, when we were about to leave, he asked us to sit back down, and he actually did dua khair. He did a dua, and he said that he prayed that our work continues. He gave his handout in terms of the olive branch, and said we could go to him at any time. But he said, Shaheen, remember one thing. This is going to be a challenge for you. It's not going to be easy for you. But one thing you must do. And I said, well, what is that then? He said, you make sure you keep records of everything you do. It's very important, because that will be something you're going to need even on the day of judgment. Yeah. And I thought, you know what, this sounds like what my father would say to me. So over time, very quickly, I realized that the only way we're going to tackle this is if we deal with it from an Islamic perspective. So as far back, I think it was 2002, I was fortunate enough to meet somebody called Ali Jan Heather, who now works in postgraduate NHS as a senior manager, or a director's role, I think it is. And he wrote a document for us, which was called Domestic Violence from an Islamic Perspective. I think he spoke about it in 2002. And then I asked him if we could have it in a document. So we've been circulating that and sharing that since that time. There was
That
also
document, sorry to come in is that you feel that document is still relevant today?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say it's more relevant now than even then, because of prevalence of domestic violence. And let's be clear, I know that everyone is now concerned about the pandemic that we're facing, and the World Health Organization has declared that. But I'm not sure if people know that actually in 2013, the World Health Organization declared the violence against women was a pandemic in 2013. So actually, for us, you know, we're triple whammy, not even double whammy, because we have the injustice of discrimination and inequality in society. Then we have the issues around COVID, but the pandemic in terms of violence against women, you know, it was declared in 2013. But I would say it was declared by them as an organization then, but those of us who work on the ground can tell you that, you know, even the types of cases that we had, say back in 1999 to what we have now have vastly changed. The nature of how they have changed.
I'm going to leave that there and pause that there with you for now. Thank you so much. And you've referenced some incredible people who we, I guess, all mutually on this panel know as Humera and Khaleda Khan, who are a force of nature and have influenced so many lives of women and men, as well as scholars as Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and others. It's interesting because you mentioned women, and I think it's also fair, and I should have mentioned this earlier, that domestic abuse is not just a female issue, although it's more prevalent with females, and this could have something to do with the recording of domestic violence and going to the police. We also know 1 in 6 men in the UK experience a form of domestic abuse too. Shireen, I just want to move on to you. As somebody who's worked in domestic abuse, dealing with it on a policy level for the last 10 years and longer, because I know you've worked with Shaheen and other organisations in governance too, and on the front line, how has it changed? Can you just explain that to me? Because I know there's been a change from 20 years ago until today, and what that change has been, how has it shifted, and what are those contributing factors?
Before I get into that, I just want to put some context around here. So for the past 10 years, most of the victims I've worked with have been Muslim women, primarily Muslim women, from various backgrounds, mostly BME women, from BME communities, and a small proportion of white European converts. And I think, you know, like you mentioned earlier, Saba, there are male victims, and there are specific reasons why male victims are less likely to report and get help. And that's a whole different topic for a whole different day. And I'm sure we could get a whole session unpacking all the complexities around male victims. So I just want to, you know, my perspective and what I'm sharing is from working with Muslim women here in the UK. So you mentioned about the complexities of domestic abuse. You know, a long time ago, when people would talk about domestic abuse, we would associate it with physical violence. We would, you know, the physical act of somebody assaulting their wife or their husband. But it has never been limited to that, even back then, but we just didn't recognize it. And, you know, today it encompasses physical, emotional, sexual, financial abuse. And the key thing here, I think people need to understand, the core of domestic abuse is about power and control. You know, it's about somebody being in a position of power and control and a victim who's a target of the abuse. There's usually a massive discrepancy of power between the two people in that relationship. Now, this isn't unique to Muslims. I think that's something, you know, we've been very clear on in the organizations I've been involved with. It happens across all sections of communities here in the UK, but where it differs is the faith of the victims. We're talking about victims who share a faith with us, and their faith, or our faith, has a massive impact on the decisions they make, or even acknowledging and understanding that they're victims of domestic abuse. So you asked about the change. You know, one big massive change is the recognition.
Or is there a change?
The recognition of coercive control as a criminal offence.
Absolutely.
That's massive. You know, it's been discussed in the media loads these past few years. And from the outset, you know, with all the work that we've been doing and the training I've undertaken on this matter, coercive controlling relationships can sometimes appear to be quote unquote loving relationships, where a partner appears to be absolutely devoted to the other person. And I say this as someone who's been around the circuit of Islamic talks and courses about the ideal Muslim marriage. I think my husband might, differ on that bit, on my efforts on that one. But in terms of some of the behaviors that we see in coercive controlling relationships at times gets promoted within these courses. And I think we've got to be very careful with that. In our aim, in our quest towards this, ideal Islamic marriage, perpetrators take advantage of what they're taught to exert control on their victims. So when I first started working with Shaheen, we were working with victims. When we were working with the client, a lot of the narrative, when we're unpacking it, discussions or even excuses some people made around domestic abuse, it was linked back to culture. Back then I thought, oh my God, how do we get around this? Now I think culture was so much easier to deal with. Victims, families, sometimes even perpetrators would say things like, this is just how it is in our culture. It's something I was brought up with. And, you can break down culture, you can break down cultural practice. And at the end of the day, you can say, look, this is part of a culture that's not bound to your faith as a Muslim. And as a Muslim, you can cut it off, you can remove it, you can, use your faith as a pathway to heal. But in the last few years, this has changed. Perpetrators are using faith to justify their behavior. We've got a situation now where victims are put in a position where they're not only worrying about keeping themselves safe, they're more worried about putting their soul at risk of hellfire. Think about if you're a victim, it's not, I've had women tell me, it's okay if he hits me, I don't want to go to Jahannam for disobeying my husband.
So they're linking that to their understanding of Islamic references.
And a part of me is thinking, look, we all know, everybody knows our faith doesn't justify any of this. However, it doesn't stop perpetrators taking hadith, taking Quranic verses, and anything they can use to justify that behavior. And don't forget, perpetrators isolate and control victims. Where else can they go? When victims share what's going on, sometimes, some of the advice I've seen other people give victims is have sabr. And I think this is where I would like to see our imams and scholars really push for a change, is how we understand and implement the concept of sabr. We, and I mean collectively us as an ummah, cannot and must not ask a victim to stay in the space where he or she is at risk of actually losing their life, and we tell them to have sabr. You pray, you make dua, and you understand that sabr isn't putting your life at risk. It's about having faith in Allah that your soul will not be punished for getting help, and that our faith is not one of oppression. And as a practitioner, one of the most effective approaches for me is when it comes to Muslim victims of domestic abuse, is working with them to reframe that concept of sabr, getting them to understand that the core of the maqasid is about the preservation of life, and you are not disobeying Allah when you ask for help to keep yourself safe. Allah doesn't want you to live a life of oppression, and that people coming into your life is Allah's way of responding to your prayers and du'as. Last but not least, I just want to talk a bit about my time when I was dealing with coordinating domestic homicide reviews. This is where a person's been murdered by someone they've been in an intimate relationship with. And you know what? The most common thing I get from their friends and family, because we invite friends and family to contribute to the panel, right, is this: oh, he or she didn't seem like the kind of person who would do it. And guess what? This is the exact same thing victims of domestic abuse say about their perpetrators. This is about power and control, and perpetrators can lose it. So that's, I'm going to leave it at that before we hear from our esteemed imams and scholars, inshallah.
It's really interesting you've mentioned the idea of how much it's changed from the cultural aspect, the nuances, and that we've had a paradigm shift into the faith aspect, especially when it comes to the idea of sabr. So there's this idea collectively, when something happens to somebody, that you have patience. So it's in the terms of domestic abuse, are we talking about a passive patience, just sit there, tolerate it, God will help you through it? Or do we now need to change that narrative and think about an activism patience, and maybe the idea of fortitude and getting out of that? So that's something which I think we can all think about, and I will relay that question to Khola later. But before I get to Khola, we have a short video that we would like to share with all of our viewers. We were hoping that we would get somebody who has experienced domestic violence, who is a survivor, to come and speak with us today, but due to the sensitivities, we thought that it wouldn't be appropriate. But we think that we have a video just to give anybody who's watching, who wants to understand what is going on or is experiencing it, here is a video, and then we will talk about that afterwards. When the video is ready, do one of the admins want to play that video for us, please? Anybody there to play our video? No? Okay, so I think what we'll do while our admin is trying to get that ready, we have 2 minutes. I think what I'll do is, Khola, I'll just bring you in for the next few minutes. I'm getting messages from the admin team as we're talking. I just wanted to pick up that point from what Shireen said, which is this idea of sabr and how much it's changed over the last 10 years in her experience. So from this idea of cultural understanding or behaviors to religious understanding, so people hiding behind their religiosity to behave in the way that they do. Can you just give us your perspective from a theological understanding?
Yeah, thank you. It was very moving listening to both Shireen and Shaheen there. You know, my office, the Islamic Sharia Council, we will get maybe 1,000 applicants every year, and half of them will go forward to actually go into the process for divorce, both men and women, but the majority will be women. And half of them will want advice or counselling or mediation or, you know, referrals to anger management or whatever. And when I speak to these women, you know, the majority of the cases that are coming to us because they've got marital problems or because of domestic abuse, and often with a link with alcohol and drugs. So the men are taking addictions, you know, they're addicted to alcohol and drugs, and they're taking out on the women. And when I speak to these women and I hear the most horrendous stories on a daily basis, it's terrifying, I'm being honest, it's absolutely terrifying sitting across a woman, listening to her story. And I often ask them, but you were married for 15 years, 25 years, and you put up with that kind of abuse, physical, psychological, emotional, financial, you name it, you know, you put up with it. Why did you take so long to get help? And they immediately say, because I was told to do sabr. I went to my parents and they said do sabr. Their own parents said do sabr. I went to my in-laws and they just, you know, pretended it wasn't happening. Oh no, Abid is a lovely boy, you know, our son's lovely, he wouldn't do anything of the sort. Oh, well, what are you doing wrong? And immediately put the blame on her. And so again, it's that sense of sabr that we need to be patient in the face of calamity. We're somehow being rewarded. But in Islam, we've never had that concept of put up with abuse. In fact, the Quran dislikes zulm, injustice, oppression. And Allah Almighty is so angry about oppression, and He says in the Quran, who will get up and help people who are crying out for help? Who is going to get up and actually do jihad, you know, go and protect people? Every day we read in Surah Fatiha, Maliki Yawmiddin, Allah Almighty says, I am the Lord of the Day of Judgment, because that's the day of justice. You know, I hate this oppression that's going on in this world. So we Muslims are not supposed to be pacifists who sit there and turn the other cheek and get beaten up for it. We fight injustice and oppression. But unfortunately, the support, because it isn't there from families and from the wider community, and my call has been for many, many years to Imams, because I think Imams have this incredible opportunity every single Friday. No matter what people are like, no matter how, you know, non-religious they are in their lives, they may be drinking and womanizing and taking drugs and all the rest of it. But Friday, they're going to be in the mosque generally for Jum'ah, because there's this sense of, especially if they're in communities where there is a very large Muslim community, they want to be seen as religious people, good people. So they turn up to the mosque. And so the Imams have this opportunity every single Friday to be preaching to hundreds, if not thousands of people. And I really think Imams should be doing this every month, not once a year, not twice a year, not when there is some sort of call from organizations, but every month there needs to be a khutbah where they talk about these issues. Imam al-Ghazali, you know, Shireen mentioned about maqasid Sharia, you know, what is Sharia about? What is Islam about? Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he said Sharia is justice. And what could be a greater injustice than abusing and hurting your wife, your spouse, your daughter-in-law? Imam al-Ghazali, he looked at maqasid al-Sharia. What is the objective of Islamic law? The objective of Islamic law is not to force people to pray. It's not to force people to wear the hijab. The objective of Sharia is to protect life and liberty. You know, if we think these are European concepts or modern concepts, they're not. They've been part of Islamic law right from the beginning, that we protect life and liberty, that we give justice, that we stop oppression. And yet I think that even though we've got everything there in our faith, we are not able to use it to our advantage at the moment. And women are suffering beyond words. I think I'll stop there. That was quite long.
That was very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting when we talk about Maqasid al-Sharia, because as you said, it's about justice and it's about, you know, protection. And we know the sanctity of life is a primary command by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why we're all locked in our homes during COVID. But yet, as much as, you know, the sad aspect of this is, you know, it's taken COVID, despite that, you know, despite the fact that we talk about domestic violence when cases arise and it hits the national media and then it dies, but it's taken the pandemic in order for majority of mainstream national broadcasters and media outlets to actually cover COVID collectively, which I haven't seen in a very, very long time. But it's interesting because if we are all in our homes with, if people are in their homes with their perpetrators, then, you know, the concept of Sharia Maqasid doesn't necessarily, you know, people don't live by these rules, despite the fact that they might be going for their Friday prayers, which people aren't doing in these last few weeks. This takes me on to, I'm going to bring in our Imams, because I think it's a fair, this is a good point to bring them in and get their contributions. So Qari Asim, your video is off. Can we see you? Oh, you're now back with us. I wanted to get your perspective. You obviously have a legal background. You serve a community. You're heavily involved in policy when it comes to Muslim communities in the UK. When we talk about Maqasid al-Sharia, when Imams have training, it's understood that real tangible issues aren't actually discussed. And I know you deal with DV cases because people contact you constantly all the time and you're always getting questions. So what is it from the male perspective and from the scholarly perspective as a religious leader, where is the training lacking? And also from a male perspective, can you offer your perspective on this?
Sure. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the partners who brought this webinar together. I think it's really important that as the diverse community, we are discussing this issue that exists in the Muslim community. You know, domestic violence exists in all communities, including Muslims. Some of us have made it a taboo issue and think that it's too sensitive to discuss. There shouldn't be any issue that's too sensitive to discuss. And I'm really grateful to all the panelists in particular. So far, we've heard very emotional and also very powerful pleas from those who've been through it and who also helping women day in and day out. And I really admire their courage and determination to tackle domestic violence. You know, it beggars belief that 2 women every day are dying because of domestic violence, and you know, it just is unconditional. And so we Muslims,
2 women a week.
2 women a week. Sorry, yeah. 2 women a week are dying from domestic violence. And for Muslims, I think it's looking at from Islamic perspective, from cultural perspective, and also from legal perspective. You know, as far as Islam's concerned, you know, it's very clear. The Holy Quran talks about that marriage should be about, you know, tranquility, unconditional love, tenderness, protection, encouragement, peace, kindness, comfort, justice, and mercy. Mawadda wa rahmah. And mawadda in the Holy Quran, the word means unconditional love. The home should be the safest environment for women and for spouse and also the children. And now if the safest environment for one has become a place of threatening, intimidation, and abuse, you know, then something has drastically gone wrong. And you know, when I was hearing earlier about patience, I was thinking, well, why doesn't anyone advise the perpetrator to be patient and have issue with his anger management? You know, it's like rather than the abuse. You know, sometimes people think, well, you know, if we talk about this, the victim is bringing shame on the community or on the family. Rather, it's a perpetrator who's bringing shame on the family and everyone, including parents, family members. They should look at it as not necessarily about, this is about pointing fingers. It's about, look, someone's got anger management issues, someone's got other issues, personal issues. Let's discuss them and let's find help. Rather than actually get to that stage where people are being thrown out of their homes, people are hospitalized or other issues. So this is one aspect. And then there's obviously, I think Shri mentioned about cultural aspects as well as Islamic aspects. So it is really disturbing that sometimes people quote verses of the Holy Quran or a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In his 80 years of married life, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never raised his finger or his voice on a woman. And he is a role model for us. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. So he is the best model for us. And in his 38 years of married life, he never did that. How can someone say that our faith actually allows to beat someone or to be violent towards someone? It just doesn't stack up. So that's what one of the points I just wanted to make. And so this is one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme is that culturally, people, when they say, well, we've all been raised up like that, and this is something for us to think about. If the couple are doing something like that, it has an impact on children. It's not just ruining the lives of two individuals involved, or it's actually having huge impact on the children, on the family members. To accept abuse is un-Islamic. If I be very about it, I think violence, domestic violence, is haram in Islam. It's unlawful. It's not allowed in Islam. And the implications are not just on the couple, but actually on the family and on the children and everyone who's involved. And so as an imam, I do come across cases, and I think that's the case about imams across the country. And this is where we have to think about. So, for instance, I'm chair of Minab Mosque and Imams National Advisory Board. Very early on, actually, in the towards the end of March, we were hearing that people were calling in saying, due to COVID-19, abuse has already started. And we, as imams, discussed about it, and discussed how we need to have mechanisms in place. Now, there are two aspects. Firstly, none of the training, like Islamic training of imams, actually includes dealing with such communal issues, especially when it comes to muamalat, when it comes to issues concerning the family matters. If I'm frank, some imams don't know in which direction they should put someone to. Where should the referrals go to? I may not be equipped. I may not know everything as an imam, because that's fine. But at least I should know where can I point someone to. That's it's a simple mechanism issue. It's not really having a go at or anything like that. It's just like that we all, as a community, we need to think about. Simple steps can save people's lives. And as far as thinking that actually because the children are involved and therefore the woman should just do sabr, that's Islam hasn't allowed that. So in a way, are we what God has allowed us? Do we know more than the Lord of the heavens and the earth? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah la yuhibbu zalimin, indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like the oppressors. So it's about bringing that comfort, justice, mercy, kindness, tenderness in the family environment. So that's one thing in terms of perhaps we should consider, how can imam be trained on dealing with issues such as domestic violence, child abuse, other forms of abuse that also take place. And secondly, our institutions should develop mechanisms so they can have relationships, partnerships, and also know where they should refer people to. And then I think in the long term, thinking about what do we do? Because that's another thing in terms of, sometimes people think, well, it's going to break up the family. What happens when someone is being abused and the family needs to now depart their ways? Where do women go? What happens? All of that, I think as a community, we need to think about and put the mechanisms as well as institutions in place so that, we can not only just raise awareness about it, and Sister Hola also talked about imams and talking about it. Absolutely. I think we should talk about all forms of abuses, including domestic violence, during our Friday sermons and other opportunities that we get, because this is not about PR. This is not about talking about a fashionable issue. This talking about Islam and what our faith and our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has set as best example for us. Thank you.
And so it looks like we've lost the connection with our presenter Sabah. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill that gap until Sabah is able to restore that line. Thank you very much for your important contribution there, Imam Qari Asim. I'm also very, very pleased to see that Sheikh Ahmed Babakar has joined this discussion. So far, Sheikh, we've been hearing lots of experiences from women who are on the front line in dealing with these domestic abuse and domestic violence cases. And we've also just heard the contributions of Imam Qari Asim when it comes to the specific issues within the Muslim community. Would you be able to share with us some of your experiences and also enlighten us from an Islamic perspective as to the reality of domestic violence, how widespread you have experienced it to be in our society, and what measures you think we can start to put into place so we can be from the people who يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, those who call towards the good and they stop that which is bad and harmful, one of these things being domestic abuse and domestic violence.
جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم. Ramadan Mubarak to you and to everybody listening. I'm sorry I'm late. I was very busy. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وآله أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. ربي أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأصلح لي في ذريتي إني تبت إليك وإني من المسلمين. Ramadan Mubarak to everybody listening. This subject, just as all subjects that are concerning women, is very serious. Very serious because the Quran was revealed to Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam carrying a surah named An-Nisa, the women. There is no surah in the Quran called Al-Rijal. And if there is one wisdom behind that, is to show the importance of the role of the woman within humanity generally and within the Muslim home. The mother carries all the responsibilities of helping and guiding in nurturing the future generations. And if this mother in any way being given no respect, shown no proper guidance, shown no proper education in her life, not being loved or cared for, then everything goes wrong. When I came to Britain, one of the things that I found when I was teaching in Western schools, they used to think that children from one single home, meaning just raised by their mother, for sure are going to fail. This exactly matches what takes place in other countries. When they see a man who's not really acting the way he should act, they say tarbiyat niswan. He was nurtured by a woman. And that is upsetting because these are all things that are carried out by cultural understandings. And I believe and I trust people by nature have always divided the sharing of the living of this world between males and female. And it depends upon which home you are growing in and which society you are in and which community you belong to. So some communities, women are more stronger. Some, now if you go to Mauritania, women are in the market, selling and buying, okay? And the scholars are in the desert studying, because that's the way they taught properly, that women should be nurtured, not just to be mothers, but to be leaders. Because believe me, behind every good man, whether it is a sheikh. Look at Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. It's his mother. Imam al-Shafi'i, it is his mother. Imam Malik, it is his mother. Without that mother, there is nothing. So when I look at my own life living in the West here, I feel sorry for our condition. Because in this world here we live in, abuse comes from two sides. From a side whereby the father in the family had been abused previously. And everybody knows anybody who's been abused, he will carry on doing the same thing. Or because of what they take, whether it's drugs or alcohol, something like that. This is one thing. But there is also people who are abusing because they want to show that they possess the power. And that's it. In the case of us as Muslims living in this society for the last 50, 60, 70 years, for me personally, almost 50 years in this country, because some of those people who came, they are bringing what they have from their countries to this country. And not just that, they don't understand the culture we live in. So they want the same thing to happen. I give you an example. I have seen example of young women, their parents will abuse them so much that they are not allowed any freedom, even in the right way. For example, they can't go to university. And even if they accept to go to university, they have to choose what to do and how to do it. And all those things, there is no place for them. If you don't trust your children, that means you did not nurture them properly. What that leads in the case of the kids growing up in the West here, they begin to be abused verbally, then emotionally, then economically. They were not giving them the money they need. Then they might even be beaten up. Moreover, these children go and mix with other children from similar homes, Muslim homes, but they have freedom and they're living properly. So they get encouraged to get out. And if they get the wrong people, when they get out, we lose them. And we as Muslims, we are supposed to preserve them and look after them. And the mothers in this home where children go this way, they are abused even further because their daughters are like them. If the girls are bad, because of you. If the girls are not going right, because of you. If they insisted to go to university, because you encourage them. So the mother gets verbal abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse. I have seen in my lifetime teaching in schools, and especially in Muslim schools, many mothers who used to come to my office cry really. And I used to feel sorry. And I spend most of my time doing a lot to save these women. By giving talks, by making my Jum'ah khutbah specifically about this subject, so that the children will take it to their mother. Because when they go home, what did you study today? The Sheikh said. And alhamdulillah, it helped a lot of them and to benefit from that. But sadly, some of them slipped out and they end up living in refuge. Some, their children are in the street taking drugs. Muslim kids, it makes you cry. And some of those also, people who came later, because of political reason in our countries, Islam is for them is like this: my way or the highway. I am the deen. I am Islam. And everything from wearing and dressing, they must dress like the cultural dress. Although Islam doesn't have a cultural dress and it doesn't have a uniform. Islam have a code. That's it. You can wear anything. You can wear Western clothes. So what? But as long as they're Islamic, the Prophet wear different clothes. Number two, sometimes they want them to act upon certain acts that they do not befit the society we live with. And I am always against this, because if you chose to live here, you should live according to the time and to take the best of the culture that we live in. You cannot push your children. And for example, there are some parents say, no, you must eat with your hand. It's the sunnah. You cannot use fork and knife. Come on. Doesn't make sense. You can't force something. A sunnah can be taken and it will bring the person closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if it is not carried, you're not going to be punished about it. If it has to be carried out. But these are ashya mustahabba. These are just liked if you can do them. If you can't, you can eat with fork and knife. I don't think there is any place for these things. There is a big misunderstanding. A lot of the non-Muslims and the Muslim, they think that Islam has given privileges to men. And specifically when it talks about الرجال قوامون على النساء. This qawama, they take as a privilege, although it is a responsibility. whereby even in inheritance, I was taught when I was young by my father and my teacher in the school that I studied, that if you inherit twice your sisters, remember, you have the same share like her, but the extra share you get is to look after the home, because the men are supposed to look after the women. You don't ask the women to spend money. That men spend. I can't go to my country now. I'm living with my sisters and my mother, and then I ask them to spend in the house. I have to spend, because when my father passed away, he left me more than he left them. This is one thing. Second thing, Allah says, hit them. وَضْرِبُوهُنْ. I am asking everybody listening, is Allah the most wise? Allah the most knowledgeable? Allah the most loving? Telling you, if you have a problem with your wife, then talk with her. If it doesn't work, then stop talking to her. If it doesn't work, sleep aside from the bed with her. If it doesn't work, separate the room from her. And then if it doesn't work, come beat her up. It doesn't mean that. I'm telling you 100%. This word adrib is not used for hitting. And the scholars, past and present, when they say, oh, Allah means take a miswak. Rubbish. What miswak? Does the miswak hit? What a rubbish. What? This is a misunderstanding. You know, just like the people of today, when they talk about jihad, they take jihad as killing. Although Allah never used the word jihad for killing. When he wanted fight, he used the word, okay, qital. Qital meaning to fight. وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ. When Allah wants to use hitting, look for the zani and the zaniya. For the drunken person. ربنا said, وَجْلِدُوهُمْ. It is jald. Allah used. Allah didn't say to you, ajlid your wife. For example, Allah said, وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا. وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ طَرِيقًا فِي الْبَحْرِ يَبَسًا. Language is so, Arabic is so beautiful. I am asking everybody, please, for Allah's sake, we are living at a time whereby everybody hearing, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً, hearing it and just passing it and interpreting it, not the way they hear it, but they add into it or subtract or give their own interpretation. But I remind everybody, Allah will question you in the day of judgment. We are going to lose our young women who are growing up. What happened to those girls who left our Western countries and went and joined Daesh? Where are they today? Either they were enslaved or raped or left with children and they don't know what to do. They are begging to come back. What are we going to do? Or our girls who cannot find the means to live within the Muslim community and they are living outside and the only means for them is to marry non-Muslim men, and many of them are, and they have children. What are we going to do? The community is in dire need of wise men, but with knowledge and understanding of the life we live in this day and age to make the right plan for the future. Because I have my own children and I have now my grandchildren. One day I'm going to die, sooner or later. My wife will not be here. My children will go. What happened to those grandchildren and their children? They're going to be British living here. They don't know Sudan. They don't know where their mother came from. They just know this country. And if we don't put the right path for them, what happened to the Jews when they are scattered in the earth will happen to the Muslims, and they will be lost. So please, everybody who is responsible, take your responsibility seriously. What Imam Asim said about training the Imam is a good thing, but really training by itself, to me personally, is not sufficient. We need to make those people live. In the olden days, the student, after they learn, they send them to the pious men to follow them, to carry their shoes, to carry their book, to see how they act. Imagine today we have got masajid, they have got imams, they are trained well, but they're not married. What do they know about intimacy in marriage? What do they know about loving in marriage? Nonsense. That's why you see a lot of fitna among the young imams. This is not good. And those who are not knowledgeable, they fall into the trap of Iblis playing with them. So they are surrounded by women, marrying one, divorcing one, marrying two, and they are using the religion to their advantage, abusing Islam in their sight, but they are not abusing Islam, they are abusing themselves. But the children of today, they don't know. I hear it every day. So we need to wake up and we need to do something soon. And this calamity that befalls us today, this virus, is only a soldier, an unseen soldier. You cannot even see it with the microscope properly. It is a hidden soldier from Allah, frightening. I had never seen this. I have lived more than all of you. This is the first time in my lifetime I see something stopping everything. Today there are almost 40 million people losing their job in America. In our Britain, we have got more, but we are not revealing it. Things are very bad. Why? Because of this virus whom Allah has sent to allow us to cut ourselves in our home and to reflect. What are you doing as Muslim? Forget about the world. We the Muslim, we the Imams, we the Da'iyas, we the scholars of this religion, we are supposed to be the representative of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If a kafir comes to me and says to me, well, Muhammad sallallahu was sent to all mankind, rubbish, he didn't come to me. I will say I am here. But if he looks in me that which contradict even the nature of humans or the living of the life I live with the people they are living, doesn't. And I will finish with this. Look at the tarbiyah of Rasulullah. When Mu'adh ibn Jabal went to Yemen, the Prophet asked him, when you go there as my da'iyah, okay, what will you do when you are confronted with the problem? I will look into the Quran that you taught me. If you don't find, I look at your Sunnah. If you don't find, I will look at the example I saw around me. And if you don't find, he said, then I will look into my own heart. This is what the Prophet taught us. But without that, no. We insist on hadith da'if and hadith sahih because we are worried about the chain. The word of the hadith might be perfect. We accept any wise word. We say this is a wisdom from Mao Tse-tung. This is a wise word from Ma'arif Lenin. But when it comes from the Prophet, oh, it is da'if. Forget about that. Why it is da'if? Because of one man on the chain, he is being seen walking, eating. That's it. They were all eating we are all liars. Nothing should be accepted from us. So we need to go back and reflect and think wisely. And I will say to all those who are responsible in Imam Online, especially my Shawkat and all those brothers, they really need to sit down and strategically plan. Maybe we cannot fulfill it ourselves, but people will come and fulfill it, inshallah. At least we have done something, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala.
Sheikh Babaga, thank you so much for that very reflective, very powerful offerings and contribution. And you went into all sorts of directions and had so many different various subfactions of that real contribution and covered lots and lots of areas. Apologies to everybody watching it, tuning in. As you know, as I mentioned earlier, I did have technical issues and I'm so sorry. I'm now on my phone, so bear with me. The joys of technology when you're doing live webinars. Chef, thank you so much. You mentioned some really interesting points, and I know Adam, you mentioned things earlier, and I just want to pick up on these on those points. And Hola, I'm going to come back to you, which when Sheikh mentioned the idea of this idea that people think, you know, I'm a man and this is the behavior because in Islam this is what I understand, and they're getting all their references from Islamic scripture, even though, you know, we know that this doesn't exist, as you mentioned earlier. But also it's all too often that when women or members who are you know, experiencing domestic abuse normally go to an imam to seek advice, the imam comes out with something like well, as Adam mentioned earlier, have patience, or doesn't actually know how to signpost, doesn't know because they haven't had the training, and all too often I've seen it, and I'm sure you've all experienced, the women on this group, and maybe the men too, that often when you do raise domestic violence issues or domestic abuse issues or cases or anecdotal references into imams, they dismiss it all too often. And I just wanted to get your take on this as somebody who deals with it head on from a Sharia point of view. Where do you see, you know, where are the gaps and what needs to be done in order to bridge those gaps?
So you're asking me, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, you know, absolutely spot on that often when men are abusing their wives and saying, for example, you cannot work without my permission because you have to listen to me, you have to obey me. So this sense of obedience of a wife to her husband, which is almost like that of a slave. So she needs his permission to get a job. She needs his permission to have friends. She needs his permission to visit her own parents. I'm hearing that every single week, that I need my husband's permission to visit my own parents. And if the husband says no, they will actually cut them off for years that they cannot visit their own families. And this kind of control, this coercive behavior, the men are saying, and then it's obviously been backed up by family members, well, you know, he's your husband, you have to obey him. So this cycle is being repeated within our communities. It's not something the imams are saying. It's not something that the masajid are saying. It's something clearly that the scholars are not saying, but within our communities, this is entrenched, that men are superior, that they have the power, that they have control, and if you're not obedient to them, you will go to hell. And so women are putting up, as I said earlier, with decades of abuse because they're terrified of going to hell, because they're terrified of disobeying their husbands.
So they become very submissive in those roles. Shaheen and Shireen, back to you as practitioners on the front line. You both provide training. Shaheen, I know you've been doing this for a very, very long time. Adam mentioned earlier that there is a lack of training when it comes to, you know, imams or religious leaders when they're doing their training. Khola's mentioned it too. There's a couple of, you know, facets to this. Number one, the lack of training. What are the mechanisms that are already in place and what needs to be done? But also another perspective to this is when somebody comes to you, whether male, female, they're dealing with domestic abuse, what are the contributing factors to, like, what does it take for somebody to report it and then to get up and make that decision to leave? Because there must be things like financial issues involved. If we're dealing with, you know, in Britain today, we are 4 generations of Muslims, of Islam, or 5 generations almost in this country, but domestic abuse, the statistics are still high. We also know that structural inequalities may be contributing factors to this. So if a woman in her 40s has 3 children and, you know, she's experiencing domestic abuse, but she hasn't worked for a very long time, does she have the financial backing and support to be able to go and, you know, make that step and make that decision to walk away? What needs to be done? How does somebody make that decision? Firstly, what are the mechanisms in place for that? And then when it comes to the training aspect, what needs to be done? And that's over to both of you. Who would like to go first?
Shall I go with the last bit around, not the training? Sheen can do the training because she's the training expert between the two of us. If we talk about, usually what I've found with victims is that by the time they ask for help, it's because they've had enough. They can't take it anymore. It's, you know, I remember a few years ago, I was at a Women's Aid event, and they said that BME women are 4 times more likely to tolerate abuse and be victims longer than white women. And if you think about, lots of Muslim women are from BME backgrounds, we take 4 times longer to report it. And sometimes it's actually after things have gone off horrendously, when you've got cauliflowered ears because your husband's abused you so bad that your ears are mangled. It's when you've lost your baby, your pregnancy, because your husband's kicked you in your belly and you've lost that pregnancy. That's when you take that step. And when you unpick everything, you've realized that's not the first incident. There's been years and years and years of continuous abuse. And, you know, Sheikh Khola spoke about the permissions and the control of, you know, having friends. If you have no friends, who are you going to talk to? If you don't have parents that you're in touch with, nobody's got your back. That's the kind of control mechanism that somebody's in. And Sabah, you mentioned, you know, if you're 40 years old, you've not worked, you've got 3 children under the age of 10, you don't even have your own savings account. And you're telling me as a victim, you need to pack up and leave and start your life somewhere else. We can put you in refuge, but you've got to start from scratch. You know, some of these women might not even know their national insurance numbers. They have no identity. So, you know, it's actually a lot of work. You know, I credits due to all the hardworking men and women who work in our refuge provisions across the UK. They do a really tough job of helping somebody who sometimes don't want to be there, who have had no choice but to leave, and trying to get them to start their life from scratch. It is absolutely challenging. And sometimes, you know, when you think about the complexities of some of our communities with honor-based violence, we are talking about people having to move hundreds of miles away with no friends, no family, and starting from scratch.
There's a trust issue involved in this as well. If somebody wants to, I mean, I can imagine if somebody wants to go and, you know, rely on somebody or you know, or go and tell somebody in confidence, there is that fear that it could go back to their partner who is abusing them. So how does that even start? And as you said, it normally starts when somebody's, you know, had enough or their children's lives are at risk. But do you find that, do the people who are experiencing it, do they understand, especially if they have families, that their children's lives are at risk? And most parents are willing to protect their children when they're dealing with domestic abuse. What's the breaking point, I suppose?
It's only usually when the child starts getting hit. For a long time, mothers will tolerate being beaten and abused on the basis that their children's not touched or hit. but they don't realize that, you know, when you're being abused, your children are affected. Full stop. Even if they're not being physically touched by somebody, they're seeing the abuse. You can't be the best mother you possibly can when you are a victim of DV. And your husband, I'll also hear things like, oh, he's a good father. Even though he's abusing me, he's a good father. No, nobody can be a good father and abuse their, you know, the mother of their children. It doesn't work that way.
No.
And let's not forget, the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic abuse is when they're actually leaving. That's when you see deaths taking place. That's when that loss of control, because don't forget, the perpetrators lost their control, and that's when people are more likely to die at the hands of the perpetrator. And the trust,
the family,
you know,
the family's destroyed anyway.
Yeah,
because the whole unit's broken down.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying.
I was going to say, and I think the trust issue is a massive thing. It's about the worry that if I ask for help, will my kids be taken into care? That's a massive fear for so many, you know, victims that we come across. You know, they're absolutely terrified by taking that step to asking for help. It comes with all these conditions, and what people don't realize that the longer you stay, the highly, like, you know, the likelihood of your children be taking your care just keeps on increasing because you are unable to keep them safe. I'll pass over to Shaheen, take on the complex issues of training for imams.
Shaheen, I'm sure you have the same experience when it comes to dealing with women, but if you could just take it a step further and talk about the mechanisms that are already in place, because you provide a training resource, you provide the training. There is a lack of literacy when it comes to domestic violence, and obviously through the lens of Islam, you know, where we know there's a lack of it, but what's already in place, what needs to be done?
Before I touch on that, I just wanted to add on to what Shireen's saying. I think people sometimes forget that when you've had years and years of manipulation, power and control, you forget who you are. You become somebody else, even if they perceive themselves as somebody else. So you have things like PTSD, you have things like Stockholm syndrome. So there's all of these things going on in their lives. And sometimes they can see that their child has been hit, but they will still continue to be in that relationship. And they'll stay in that relationship because they see it as a form of parenting. They see it as a justification, but because one slap isn't going to hurt anybody, is it? So there's all of these things to consider. And bearing in mind, we're talking about the partner, i.e. the husband, but let's not forget, in the majority of the cases that we deal with, it's actually not necessarily just the partner. It is often wider members of the family. So we know we've had cases where members of the family have witnessed an attack, in some cases even witnessed the murder, and they will still lie through their teeth. So I just wanted to point that out. And I know maybe this isn't the time for it, but I think it's important to say that domestic violence doesn't just happen in a husband-wife scenario. You have to recognize that things have changed. You know, there was a time when we saw domestic violence 20, 30 years ago, it was the husband and wife or two people living together. But actually now what we're seeing is, you know, girls as young as 13 and 14 being pursued by adult men. And these adult men are using religious justification from an Islamic perspective. Oh, it's okay, because the intention is that when you're of age, we're going to get married. And they will even throw in rubbish like with the Prophet. Look at the Prophet, look at the life of the Prophet when he married. And they will use these kind of things. So we have a generation of younger men and older men who are seeing women not as even people, but possessions. And I think that this idea of somebody being your possession needs to be totally blown away, because nobody should be anyone's possession. We come as one, and on the day of judgment, we answer for ourselves. You know, that's a simple, you know, a position in terms of coming from Islam. But going back to training, and you mentioned imams. So I think it's been Shireen can correct me if I'm wrong, something like 6-7 years, Cambridge Muslim College invites us every year, bar actually, for some reason, we didn't get invited last summer, but we've been going every year, and we spend a day with young imams and alimas, talking through the whole scope and range of the types of cases that we deal with. But we also explain to them, and we provide information in terms of once they're out on the ground in their communities, what they could be potentially doing to help. So we give that information to them. We provide our telephone number to them and literally say, you can contact us at any time. So we set out an overall picture in terms of what the law says as well. And the feedback has been great. The problem we have is, those are young people that are coming through Cambridge Muslim College. But if you look at the mosques and madrasas that are already there, these young people aren't necessarily going into these places. So what troubles Shireen and I, and we've seen it time and time again, is that even when there has been a conviction, so the husband has been sent to prison, yes, he might have come out, or he might have been given a fine, but nevertheless, he has a conviction, and there's children. And the imam, and we've seen actually written notes, this is the truth as I stand here, where the imams will say to the husband and the wife separately, oh, ignore, don't listen to them, i.e. social services, we will arrange your child contact. We will sort that out for you. And for me, that's so dangerous that, it angers me, it upsets me, but we're not in a position to do anything about it. We can, if it's local, we argue it, and we will go around whichever way we need to make sure that we notify them what they're doing is illegal and it's wrong. More than anything, it's putting children's lives at risk.
So we've obviously discussed aspects of children here too, and you've touched upon sexual violence, which is another kettle of fish altogether. I guess we don't have too long left. We've only got 10 minutes, and I would like everyone to think about what could be done within the Islamic paradigm and within our ethical framework, using that lens to make a British model in bringing all of these forms together. So that's practitioners, religious leaders, the literacy, DV literacy, understanding what the law says, but also with the effect that people like yourselves and others in similar positions can actually have the knowledge, have the kudos, have the know-how to be able to deal with these issues head on. So when somebody does come to a religious leader or an imam or community leader or contacts you, one of you for your, for advice, that where to signpost, what is that framework? What does it look like? How can we get adequate training? And who needs to provide it? Do we need organizations to come together? And in line with an ethical framework, which is in line with the spiritual values of Islam. Who would like to go first? I'm going to pick on Adam. Adam, what do you think? What's your thoughts?
So first of all, I have to start by recognizing and thanking all the organizations and all the individuals who have come together today to share their experiences. And I think it's refreshing. Once again, it is a reactionary measure from the Muslim community, and that reaction is probably in regards to the rise in domestic abuse during the lockdown. But at the same time, it's refreshing that we are coming together from within ourselves and discussing these issues, so other people don't come and drive the narrative, as it were, whichever way that they want. I think it's refreshing Absolutely. That we have this group of practitioners, of imams, of scholars coming together and sharing ideas. The ideal would be that we, in a society, the Muslim community should be able to be contributing and setting the benchmark practice, if you like, for these issues, because as we have mentioned, it's already been mentioned, we have the teachings in our faith tradition. Now, unfortunately, what abusers do, they don't just abuse their family members, but they even go to the extent where they abuse the religion of Allah. They'll abuse the ayat of the Quran. They'll abuse the ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they try and put this beautiful religious cloak on the most disgusting of acts, which are not just a crime according to British law, they're a crime according to our faith, Islam. And so, subhanAllah, one of the things we can take away from this is we can, alhamdulillah, maybe the ball has started rolling with this session. You know, I hope we can go on to have more and open these discussions more. But what's been made clear and what I've understood from today's session is domestic violence, domestic abuse within Muslim communities is a very real phenomenon. You know, a statistic, what was mentioned, two women every week. You know, yeah. Look how bothered the Muslim community comes when we hear about our brothers and sisters being killed in Palestine. And we should. Look how passionate we become when we hear about our brothers and sisters being killed in Yemen and Iraq and Syria. And we should feel like that. Our brothers and sisters are being killed, literally killed. And for the ones who aren't being killed, they're being kicked and punched and having their hair dragged around. They're being abused physically, financially, mentally, emotionally, all these different types of abuses. And so we as Muslims, of people who claim to follow the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, should follow the teachings of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and do whatever is needed to stop this oppression. At the end of the day, this is oppression. It's nothing else. And there's nothing worse than dressing it up in the name of religion. At the end of the day, one point which I took before, somebody mentioned about sabr. You know, sabr. Sabr, when you study Islam, you understand that sabr is to have sabr with doing good things and having sabr with refraining from bad things. And so the perpetrators need to be the ones who are having sabr, and maybe we need to start looking at some kind of support mechenism for Absolutely. The abusers themselves. Because subhanAllah, whenever a victim is abused, the first question people ask, and we need a cultural shift here, the first question, what did you do? What did the victim, no. What did the abuser do is the question we should be asking, and how are they going to be dealt with? At the moment, I'm not too sure about what support mechanisms we have in place for the abusers. Many of the abusers out there, they understand that what they're doing is wrong. They understand that this is abuse, it's oppression. Allah does not like this. Allah will not accept this. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam this is not from his sunnah. They know that they're doing something wrong, and so maybe what we need is some kind of support mechanism. Obviously, we need it for the victims, but we also need it for the abusers themselves, because many people out there know that what they are doing is wrong, and they need help, and they need support, and they need to have sabr, and we need people to encourage them in this field, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Adam. You touched upon some really important aspects there, and you mentioned narratives, and absolutely right. The whole idea of these sessions is for us to reclaim, for Muslims to reclaim the narratives. We're not denying that this issue exists. Of course it does exist in all communities, but all too often various factions like having their own opinion on when it comes to Muslim communities and our behaviours in Britain, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly, and the media usually can have a field day. So it's up to Muslims to be able to, steer that narrative, admit to the fact that there are these issues, and address them, and actually decide what mechanisms need to be in place in order to deal with these head on. Thank you so much for your contribution, and hopefully, yes, we'll be continuing this further. These issues are so broad, as we said earlier, we can't discuss this all in one day, so we're hoping, or in one session, we're hoping inshallah to continue forward. I would like to bring Qari Asim in on this. Qari Asim, can you hear us? Yes.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think, what needs to be done? Do you think we, two questions. I will ask everybody, have a think about, do you think we need a charter of some sort that we can all commit to? And what will that charter look like, not only from your own organizations where, there can be a collective charter, all too often that we tend to have things happen in the Muslim community. Imams, no disrespect to Imams and religious leaders, I respect them dearly, but they sign their names to a piece of paper just to, for some level of action, but no action takes place. What needs to be done in order to have this, to us to steer this forward? Can you just give me your thoughts on that? And also, would you do you think, Imam Ghazi Asim, would there be a buy-in from imams and other religious leaders, do you think?
Sure. Domestic violence is a complex issue, and as a result, with a multi-layered approach to tackle it, there needs to be a cultural shift. So effectively, we all, at all levels, whether imams or parents or neighbors, all all stand up against oppression, violence, abuse being committed in domestic environment. And sometimes people, well, neighbors say, or even family members say, we don't want to spy on, or we don't want to get involved. This is not about getting involved in matrimonial affairs. It's about saving lives. It's about protecting an individual.
Absolutely.
The Prophet ﷺ brought about that cultural shift when he changed this concept of woman being a property, a possession, at all levels, and then he highlighted lots of opportunities like, then also his departing words include an-nisa, the women, take care of women. He really wanted to highlight this point as much as he could. And that really, as Muslims, we should appreciate that and follow that advice. And as far as charter is concerned, I think absolutely should have a yardstick, in terms of reference, a point that we can, something that we can point to, alliance of virtues, a document that's been signed by religious leaders from across the board, and people of all traditions and backgrounds have signed up to this and said, well, abuse, it all starting from abuse in conflict areas where sometimes women are used as weapon to subjugate a particular community or a nation, all the way to people using women to weaponize women in domestic affairs, where effectively they want to showcase their superiority over their family members. We're talking about violence, obviously, but there's so many other forms of abuse that take place. I've seen so much mental abuse of women taking place.
Yes.
It just ruins people's life. So I think I know time is short in terms of there will definitely be buy-in. Lots of imams do understand and do want to speak up against it, but because the whole mechanism doesn't exist, we need to look at in a holistic way, and then from charter, translating it into reality, all the way from marriage, to sometime when people end up in Sharia councils, there should be a pathway, and things like training before marriage, going on training courses to understand, what the rights and responsibilities are. People are very keen and quick to point out what their rights are, but not what their responsibilities are. So I'll advocate a holistic approach, a multi-layer approach to deal with domestic violence in Muslim community.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you touched on two matters there. One, which is mental health, which we haven't really discussed about, and we know that's also a severe one of the biggest contributing factors related to domestic violence. Also, we know that domestic violence tends to repeat itself when it comes to children and parental violence, so it's very likely a child will continue that later on in their life, in their adult life. And also the aspect about marriage guidance or counseling. Other faiths do this. You see it in the Christian traditions, you see this in the Jewish traditions, that before a couple is getting married, they tend to sit down and get very good pastoral training when it comes to marital matters, and in practical everyday terms. But for some reason, we don't do this in Islam. And if within our Muslim communities in Britain, and if they do exist, they're very few and far in between. So this is something that we can definitely reflect on. One more question back to you, Qadi Asim, and to I'm going to go to Khola and to you next is, do you think we can, through this charter, there already is a charter that exists in Glasgow, which Shaheen can touch upon later. It was set up a few years ago. Do we need to hold these imams or these religious leaders accountable who don't know how to address this issue and dismiss it? And how can we hold them to account? I mean, this isn't a blame perspective. I'm not here to blame imams, but that's not what we're here to do. This is not a reactionary perspective. It's dealing with the issue head on. If there's a lack of literacy, do they need to put their hands up and say, look, we know we don't know much, what can we do?
Yeah, I think firstly, one of the panelists did touch upon that this is not imams or mosques are not advocating violence and not advocating abuse. What we're trying to say here is that all of us have a responsibility. So people in position, people who are hurt, people who are either victims or sometimes even perpetrators, or the families of perpetrators are aware of. If we all put a collective effort in tackling this issue, then we've got a better chance of tackling this issue. So, for instance, what imams and mosques can do is they raise their awareness about the mechanisms that exist, the support that exists, so that they can refer people to the appropriate organizations, to the relevant organizations, and also can direct people. This is something that imams and mosques can do. In order to be able to do that, it means knowing about those organizations, knowing the support that already exists. So this can be, so there can be two things that imams can do in terms of, let's say, raise awareness amongst the community during their sermons and the circles and other speeches and opportunities that they get, like the Prophet ﷺ did, and also raise awareness about the mechanisms and support that exist and the organizations that are there to support people, so that they can direct people towards that.
Absolutely. So hopefully get a buy-in from everybody. Khola, over to you.
I think a charter is an incredibly good idea, that we all need to say that this is where we want to go forward, but we also need to put our money where our mouth is. Now, our community has pots of money. There's no shortage of money in our community. And yes, it's incredibly important that we're supporting war zones and people who are suffering overseas and whatever, all incredibly important. But at the same time, we need to strengthen our institutions in Britain. And what we've done is we focused on the masajid, we focused on beautiful domes and lots of marble and lots of beautiful buildings, but we haven't focused on the problem issues at all. We're just ignoring them. Now, for example, Women's Refuge, for example, counselling for addicts. How do we give treatment to people who are addicted to alcohol, to drugs, to other addictions, etc., to children who are experiencing violence? Now, we can say that there are institutions in Britain, but we know public money is really, really tight. And every year, the cuts that are made first go onto these kind of service providers, which have been cut constantly. So when I'm referring women who come to me for help, they'll say, could you refer me? And I'll be looking, and every organization I'm thinking about has had massive cuts and cannot help them. This refuge is closed, this is closed. So why aren't we setting up our own institutions where the women will feel, or the men, or whoever's going to them, that these are culturally or religiously, they understand their sensibilities, are catering for them. And really, we should be the ones that are showing the way forward. We're not doing that. And I think pre-marriage counseling and training, and it happens in Malaysia, I think it's compulsory. We should make it compulsory. Imams should stop doing nikahs until the couple have had some, a good 3 months of training, so they know what they're going into.
Thank you so much. You're absolutely right when it comes to the financial aspect. And I know Shaheen and I have spoken about this before, and she's experienced it herself. And Shaheen, you can touch upon this in your final comments. Thank you so much, Khola. I'm taking at the end of this, I'm going to ask you all whether you agree to this buy-in and this charter. So have a think about it. Shireen, I'm going to come to you because I'm going to give Shaheen the last word before we move to Sheikh Babagar to do a dua. Shireen, what's your thoughts?
I'm just going to add, as somebody from Singapore, just to add about what Sheikh Khola said, Singapore also does the compulsory marriage counselling before you get married. So just a little shout out there to my home country.
They call it a marriage license, don't they?
Yeah, if you don't have it, you can't get your marriage certificate.
It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
We need to catch up.
So, if there is to be a charter, it needs to be clear that it's zero tolerance for domestic abuse. We can't be wishy-washy or soft on our language. It needs to be absolutely crystal clear. I think if we go down, the charter route, I think the work in Glasgow is a great starting point that we could build on. And I know I'm going to be repeating what Sheikh Khola has said. Resources. Organizations like the Henna Foundation are run on a shoestring budget. People work for free, run for free, and we sometimes have to make choices on whether we are able to support somebody or actually do our day jobs. It is an absolute struggle. So it's about resourcing the organizations who can provide support, organizations who can train. And I'm not talking just a one-day seminar on domestic abuse. We're talking about, adverse childhood experiences, intergenerational trauma, counseling, marital counseling, addiction counseling. Muslim communities, we've got huge amount of financial resources in our homes, but we tend to send it overseas. And we, you know that narrative about, oh, we can't support refugees and the homeless. No, we can do both. You know, it's not impossible to do both. I mean, to start resourcing the things here. And last but not least, support for the victims. You know, we should make sure that the refuge provisions that we have for victims in this country are places that provide comfort and safety for victims. It shouldn't be, you know, a little bed with horrible furniture, limited resources. You know, you want a beautiful space, a garden, so children in that home can play. You know, it should not be somewhere where people fear going there. It's going to give you a bad reputation, all sorts. So it's about putting our resources in where it's needed most. You know, we can build our beautiful domes, but we've also got to fund our organizations, our training programs, and our refuge provision. That's my thoughts on it.
Great, thank you so much. I love the enthusiasm that is coming out from everybody, and you've both touched on something really interesting, which is, you know, dealing with the broader aspects of other issues, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and we know these going hand in hand. And it's and if people aren't aware, and I'm sure you all are, the panelists, but if those listening, the AA model is built on Christian values, and it is the most successful. The 12 steps are the most successful global values that the AA use when it comes to alcohol abuse and you know, dealing with that. So, you know, there are models in place, and you know, there are people already doing this work in the UK. We know there are organizations like the Henna Foundation, and it's about tapping into these organizations and bringing them all together. Shaheen, over to you.
Okay, so because you specifically asked me to say something about the Scotland work. So Sheikh Ahmed Jamil, I met him a very, very long time ago. I remember he attended one of our events in Cardiff. I think he was perhaps a little bit taken aback because of the number of people that we'd hosted at this event. But he's been doing some really good work. My understanding is that he wrote a document that went something like, what does Islam really say about domestic violence? And I mentioned earlier the paper that was written by Ali Jan Hedder in 2003. So it kind of went from, you know, the paper that we had shared with the whole world, you know, from that time to someone like Sheikh Ahmed Jamil writing something like that. So my understanding, it's not a particular charter, but it's actually a document that says, what does Islam say? And I know there's some really good work being done in terms of an organization called Unity Family. And in that they do premarital courses and that sort of thing, which is great. But if somebody was going to ask me, Shaheen, if you had the power, what would you do? My position would be that, you know, where I've been very fortunate that I've been involved with the International Peace Forum, where I've been back and forth to Abu Dhabi. I've met with some phenomenal people, including women from different parts of the world. And I have made it my business to understand what they're doing in their respective countries, and taking into account also what the work of the Alliance for Virtue is all about as well. Taking into account all of this, I have been looking at, well, what is happening in these other countries? And I can tell you that what we're facing here is a crisis, and it's no different in other parts of the world. In fact, I would say that even though we're supposed to be in a place where, you know, we're in a leading country, you know, we're not a you know, developing country, but we have serious child poverty in this country. Yeah, that's the British context. So there's a lot to learn from others in terms of what they're doing, but what has appealed to me a lot is the work that's been done by our American brothers and sisters, including the scholars that are supporting them. So it's a collective approach. I urge people to look at what they're doing. They're very open about the types of issues that are arising, whereas here, for us, this is more or less a first. I mean, how often do you get men and women in one place online, you know, talking about this? So I'm really keen to reach out to others, learn from others, bring that learning to us. But any charter that anyone is looking to have, it absolutely has to be action-based. If it's not action-based, forget it. You have to have a commitment to social change. You have to have a commitment to put Islam exactly where it is, and that is in the heart of the community. You know, Islam for me, I know what it means. And it's in every aspect of what I do, day in, day out. I don't take my Islamic hat off when I'm going anywhere. It's inside of me, no matter what I do. So I'm urging people, including the, the fact that we do have organizations here in the UK, charities who have a lot of money, who seem to fail to understand the crisis of within. So, the sooner people sort of wake up and think a bit more strategically, and I would say any man or woman alive, if they really understood the damage that it is doing to our communities, they would be like, right, everything has to be not prioritized. The priority is to set the record straight in terms of, how we should be behaving towards our families, and what are we going to do about undoing the damage and looking at more therapeutic approaches to heal the damage that's been done.
Thank you so much. And effectively how to be better human beings, and using this ethical framework. Thank you so much, Shaheen. And before I move on to Sheikh Babago for a dua, I just want to find out from all of you, do you all agree to this charter and action? I'm going to go one by one. Qari Asim, yes, no?
Yes, of course. I think along with translating into reality, call for action.
Thank you. Khola?
Of course. Of
Great.
course.
Shireen?
Yep, action-based charter, I'm in.
Brilliant. Shaheen? I know what your answer is going to be.
Well, no, you don't, because
No,
it has to acknowledge, it absolutely has to acknowledge the crisis of our communities, and that is acknowledge the scope of the intersectionality of DV in this country.
Absolutely, agreed. And Adam?
Bismillah, an opportunity to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Just thank you. I think that's such a nice way to actually, reference the fact that as Muslims and religious leaders generally, and as Muslim religious leaders, those who are religious leaders, imams and scholars, have an actual commitment to the Quran. So the duty of religious leaders when it comes to scholars and imams is not only have that commitment, but live at that commitment when it comes to serving communities and educating the communities. Generally, I think we also need to understand that your average lay Muslim person doesn't really understand fiqh, because they're dealing with everyday real issues. And so we have the leaders like yourself, we have the scholars, we have the community leaders who need to, take the knowledge that you have and pass that to the community in practical terms, hopefully, inshallah. Sheikh Babago, I would like for you to read a dua before I finish the segment. So Sheikh Babago, do we get a commitment from you? Do you want to summarize and finish with a dua for us, please?
Inshallah, I will do. But before I do that, I just wanted to say one thing, that even if you have a charter and even if it is practical, because the community is so diverse, you will have too many people falling out, and it will create more havoc than. And who loses in this case? The abused. The abused are before them there is a fire, and behind them there is water they cannot swim in. And therefore, I think we should put the abused in the middle. And to be honest with you, there are things that need to be tackled, such as the family. And I see a lot of cultures where the men are given advantage. The boys eat before the girl. The best food is given to the boys. Absolutely. This is a fact you are not talking about. This has to change. This is not Islam. This is number two, that everyone talked about education before marriage. I think there are over almost 250 Muslim schools in this country, and there are too many madrasas. They should all be thinking of teaching marriage. And I do a lot of marriages. I will never marry two people without teaching them marriage first. I call them to come. We agree a program. We do a lot of marriage programs, because the rights of wives and husbands is paramount. If they don't know their rights, then a lot of people marry women, bring them home as domestic servant or slaves. That's not true. And she's a partner. And if she has one duty, it's just to nurture her children. Even domestic work is not her job. The Prophet ﷺ used to serve his family in the Sunnah. All the mashayikh will tell you this. So what I suggest, and I'm sure the person who can do this more than anybody else, Shawkat, what he needs to do is to get charities. You will not get all the charities, but at least 5, 10 of them. You get some community groupings, you can get some scholars, you can get some very well-known practicing, understanding imams, women groups. Let us say, put them together and then agree a plan. If you put that charter, as many people said, it will be just a piece of paper written, nothing is done. And I lived almost 50 years in this country. I have seen too many things, but I have never seen something really practical other than charities are raising money for abroad or building masajid. They are practical. The rest is not known. But if we can get those people together and then we think of a plan and then put that charter with the means, because if you put the charter, you don't have the means, who's going to carry it out? I'm going to be running to my business, you're going to run to the business, then it's lost. That's what I advise, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, the most merciful, the most generous. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Arham al-Rahimin, wa Ya Akram al-Akramin, wa Ya Khayr al-Raziqeen, wa Ya Rabb al-Alameen, wa Ya Rabb al-Arsh al-Azim. Oh Allah, we ask of you in this hour of Ramadan, in these beautiful days, oh Allah, we have become unable of sorting our own problems when we chose to carry the amana, Ya Kareem. Oh Allah, for our weaknesses, we are unable to do that which is the least can be done by people like us in this day and age. Not just to help ourselves, families, or communities, but to help the majority of the people of the world, Ya Kareem. Oh Allah, make it easy for everyone hearing me now, concerned about this problem, to be able to understand the responsibility they carry. For without understanding what we know, then we will not be able to fulfill. As you said, فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا Sulaiman. We have made Sulaiman to understand it. Hence, he was able to solve it, Ya Kareem. Give us that understanding. Oh Allah, allow our community leaders, whether they be in charities, schools, community centers, masajid, or whatever businesses they run, to come together and to realize building a community without having a base of people coming together to help and support with the means and those who can lead it, it will never take place, Ya Kareem. Oh Allah, allow those who are going to carry this work to find it easy, and allow the hearts that will listen to their words to understand and appreciate and comprehend and follow suit. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. And I pray for all the oppressed across the world and all the abused, and specifically those who are living in our land, among the women and the girls and the children. May Allah be there with them, and may our dua always reach them, and may they be protected from every evil, especially within. وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير.
Jazakallah, Sheikh, thank you so much for a beautiful dua. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody, this now brings us to the end of the session. We have run slightly over time. Thank you all for listening in today and staying with us. My sincere apologies for the technical issues, and if I have said anything out of term, please do forgive me for my misdemeanors, shall I say. I want to thank our illustrious panel. Thank you so much for your time, for your informative knowledge, for your contributions in providing a wonderful conversation for everybody here. I'm sure we've all learnt lots, and for the audience who are listening. I also would like to mention, for anybody who is listening in today who's been affected by the discussion, or would like to find out more, or would like to seek help, you can seek help from Imams Online on their website, which is linked on the page. It's on the Imams Online Facebook page, imamsonline.com Facebook page, and also the organisations like the Henna Foundation, which Shaheen's part of, and Qadi Asim, and various others who you can go to. There's also Women's Aid of Refuge and a national number, which we're going to link in the page below too. I'd like to thank all the organisations that were part of this today. So firstly, thank you to Imams Online for bringing this panel together and for starting the conversation, and the other supporting organisations, which is the Forum for Promoting Peace, the Alliance of Virtues, the Light Foundation, the Henna Foundation, and Peace Matters. This webinar would not be possible without all of your support. So thank you to all of you. And as I said at the start, inshallah, we're hoping this is the first step to many, many conversations around domestic abuse and domestic violence. And please do let us know your thoughts. Please, anybody who's listening, if you would like to comment, if you would have any ideas, or if you'd like to contribute to what can be done, please do contact Imams Online on their Facebook page or directly, and they'll be able to take your opinions and contributions and pass them over to the group. So thank you, everybody. I've been your chair, Sabah Zaman. Thank you for putting up. Thank you for your patience and putting up with me today. And inshallah, have a blessed day and a blessed remainder of your Ramadan.
Before you close, just before you close, Sabah?
Yes, Shaheen.
Thank you so much. It doesn't matter. We had to wait for you. You've been absolutely fantastic. This subject is not an easy subject to, talk about, let alone host. So I really want to thank you, really.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I also actually, sorry, I forgot to mention the people behind the scenes. So Sheikh has already mentioned Shaukat, thank you. So we have Shaukat, Nadeem and Zishan, who have been the force behind the scenes, who've been the brains in putting this all together with the likes of the panel. So they've been controlling the admin stuff today, and they've been superb. So thank you to you all in putting this together, and a big shout out to you all.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you all.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.